you've ever had your entire worldview, your history, your lineage, your very identity burned down to ash by the people who were supposed to love you, you know this feeling. I'm talking about a cold, calculated betrayal that makes you question every single memory you have. For me, the final, unforgivable cut arrived on a sweltering Arizona Tuesday, not with a screaming fight, but with the silent, surgical strike of a lawyer's email. I need you to tell me right now. Have you ever been completely screwed over by your family? If your answer is yes, stop what you're doing and hit that subscribe button, because I promise you, what I found out next will make your jaw hit the floor. This isn't just about money. It's about a stolen life. And if you subscribe, I'm going to show you how you can fight back when the people closest to you try to destroy your truth. My name is Graham Bell. I'm 30 years old. And until that brutal Tuesday, I believed I was the black sheep of a multi-million-dollar empire. My family, the Hayes clan, built their fortune on luxury resorts and hotels across the West. They dealt in glitz, glamour, and the calculated risk of high finance. They measured everything in liquidity and square footage. And then there was me, living and breathing in a corrugated steel warehouse outside Phoenix, where the air smelled like freshly milled metal and the high-octane ghosts of American horsepower. I was standing at my workbench, welding mask up, running my calloused hand over the newly polished hood of a '71 Plymouth Barracuda, a wreck I'd painstakingly brought back to life when the notification pinged. It wasn't a casual text. It was an encrypted email from the family's estate lawyer, a soulless automaton named Mr. Finch who viewed human relationships purely through the lens of liability and asset protection. The subject line was clipped and precise, Estate of Hayes updated provision. I didn't need to open the attachment, but a sickness settled in my gut anyway, heavy and cold. I knew what it was. I opened it, and there it was, laid out in sterile, detached legalese due to irreconcilable differences in professional and personal expectations. The interest and future claim of Graham Bell are formally and permanently removed from the entire family will. $95 million. Gone. I wasn't cut down by a punch. I was executed by a document. And here's the absolute killer, the timing. For the last 3 months, I'd poured every spare minute, every dollar of my profit, and every ounce of my expertise into restoring a vintage Duesenberg Model J, a car so rare and valuable it belonged in a museum, all as a special surprise gift for my father, Victor Hayes. He had practically dared me. He'd always said, "Graham, if you could restore that Duesenberg to its original glory, I might finally believe you amounted to something more than a grease monkey. It was supposed to be the bridge. It was supposed to be the end of the war between us. Instead, it was the perfect bait for a final, public humiliation." I remember staring at the cold glow of the laptop screen, then looking up at the flawless, mirror-like chrome on the Barracuda, that feeling, that absolute, gut-wrenching realization that you've done everything right, exceeded every expectation, and still been judged unworthy by the people who brought you into this world that is a fire that either consumes you completely or hardens you into something unbreakable. I knew my father's ruthlessness. He was the kind of man who would scorch the earth just to prove a point. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly grasp then, was that this email, this final act of financial murder, wasn't just my father making a point. It wasn't just a punishment for choosing my own path. This betrayal was the fracture that cracked open a truth that had been buried beneath 30 years of calculated lies. A truth about the man I thought was my father, the woman I called my mother, and the entire $95 million fortune that, in the grand scheme of things, was nothing but spare change compared to the life that had been stolen from me. The realization that my parents took me out of their $95 million will was just the opening act. The real drama was about to start. I'm telling you this whole story, every raw, painful detail. If you want to see how I turned this betrayal into the greatest comeback of my life, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that notification bell, because the next chapters get seriously explosive. The minute I saw Finch's email, the one telling me I was cut off, 1,000 little cuts from the past 30 years started bleeding again. Because that email wasn't just a financial document. It was the inevitable final chapter of a story that started decades ago. Back when I was just a kid trying to figure out where I fit in the Hayes golden cage. If you want to understand Victor Hayes, my father, the hotel mogul, you need to know he saw the world in 2 columns, assets and liabilities. Brandon, my older brother, was always in the assets column. I, Graham Bell, was permanently stuck below the line, a recurring expense. I think the first time the truth of my liability status really hit me was when I was around 10. Brandon was 15, and he was already talking about leverage and market capitalization. He was the perfect prototype. The son Victor had pre-ordered from Central Casting, sharp, disciplined, and obsessed with the bottom line. Brandon breathed finance. I, on the other hand, just wanted to know how things worked. I loved the sound of a well-tuned engine, the smell of burnt oil and grease things Victor called filth. One summer, while Brandon was at some high-roller finance camp on the East Coast, I found this antique brass telescope rusting away in the back of one of our storage sheds. It was beautiful, but completely seized up. I spent 2 weeks, every day after school, meticulously cleaning it, polishing it, and lubricating the gears until the optics moved smooth as silk. It wasn't worth anything on the market, but the engineering was genius. I remember presenting it to Victor for his birthday. My hands stained, my heart pounding with nervous pride. He took it, turned it over with 2 fingers, and gave me that tight, controlled smile he usually reserved for a rival bidder. Very quaint, Graham, he said, handing it back to me like it was contaminated. But a man invests in futures, not relics. Later that same day, Brandon swaggered in from the airport and tossed a thick report onto Victor's mahogany desk, a full, complex portfolio analysis recommending an acquisition deal Victor had been considering. Brandon's analysis was flawless, projecting a 30% return. Victor didn't just smile. His eyes lit up like a slot machine hitting the jackpot. He slapped Brandon on the back, and the sound echoed through the library like a judge's final verdict. "That's my son," he boomed, his voice carrying to every corner of the house. "That is a man who understands value." That moment set the template for the next 20 years. Brandon got the best schools, the high-profile internships, the effortless entry into the upper echelons of the family business. He was the golden child, bathed in Victor's absolute approval. I was the black sheep, the one Victor introduced at the country club with a tired sigh. "This is Graham. He tinkers with old cars." A hobby. The word hobby always hanging in the air like an accusation. My mother, Eleanor, wasn't actively cruel, but she was useless. She was completely devoted to maintaining the illusion of a perfect family. Her love was conditional, tied directly to our social standing. Brandon was an asset she could parade around. I was a liability she constantly tried to minimize. Her peacekeeping was always directed at me, never at Victor's cold indifference. "Graham, darling, why can't you just put the grease rag down for a few years?" she'd plead in that honey-coated voice that stung like whiskey. "Get the MBA, then you can buy all the antique rubbish you want." The message was clear. My passion was the obstacle. Their approval was the prize. But I couldn't do it. I was never going to be Brandon. While I respected the complex engineering of a business deal, I felt the engineering of an engine. After a brief, miserable attempt at business school that Victor paid for under protest, I made the calculated decision to choose my truth. I opened my own shop, Bell Restoration. Victor initially offered to bankroll a high-end garage in Scottsdale, turn it into a sterile showroom, and slap the road's name on the sign. I refused. I leased a rundown warehouse space near the railway line in the industrial heart of Phoenix. The noise was constant. The summer heat was unbearable. But the freedom was intoxicating. It was there, amidst the scent of rust removal, oil and welding sparks, that I found my true calling not fixing engines, but resurrecting history. My focus became cars that were deemed dead, unfixable, the true underdogs. I wasn't doing quick paint jobs. I was performing full frame-off, nut and bolt restorations that required the patience of a saint and the eye of an engineer. It was slow, meticulous, expensive work that only a select few collectors appreciated, and it gave me an integrity that the Hayes fortune never could. The resentment from Brandon, however, only grew. He didn't just see my career as a failure. He saw it as a deliberate insult to the pressure he lived under, a mockery of the life he was forced to lead. He'd occasionally drop by the shop in his custom Italian suits, his expensive cologne battling the odor of industrial thinner, still playing in the dirt. "Graham?" He'd smirk, always calculating the gross profit of my garage, always finding it wanting. I remember one particularly rough Christmas dinner 4 years ago. Brandon was gloating about selling a massive hotel development for an 8-figure profit. Victor was practically vibrating with pride. I tried to share a small triumph. I had just secured a contract to restore a highly prized Shelby GT500 for a major collector. A job that would absolutely validate my shop in the restoration community. Victor simply waved his hand, dismissing my news like a fly. "A contract for a Shelby, is that before or after taxes?" "Graham, it doesn't matter. It's peanuts compared to real estate. Your work is a distraction, not a legacy." That night, standing by the bar, watching the Hayes family machine run perfectly, Victor proud, Brandon smug, Eleanor relieved, I finally saw the truth. The problem wasn't my career choice. The problem was me. I could be running a billion-dollar car company, and Victor would still find a way to belittle it. Because my success wasn't his success. My passion was independent of his control. But I never knew why that independence was so desperately threatening to him. Why did he have to crush every ounce of creativity and engineering focus I had? I didn't realize then that every time Victor belittled my love for restoration, every time he compared me to Brandon, every time he dismissed the Duesenberg project, he wasn't just expressing disappointment. He was desperately, fearfully trying to suppress a truth that had been clawing its way to the surface for 30 years. My meticulous precision, my ability to see the inherent value in something others dismissed as junk, my almost obsessive focus on original engineering, these weren't traits I inherited from the Hayes family at all. They were the very genetic markers of the life that was stolen from me. They were the signs that I was never meant to be a Hayes. You know that feeling when you're driving a classic car that's running perfectly after months of work? That perfect sync of pistons, the smell of fresh oil, the deep, resonant rumble that tells you the engine is healthy. That's what I live for. It's control. It's proof that focus and honest effort yield results. And that feeling was the only antidote I had for the slow-motion toxicity of being a Hayes. After years of being the hobby kid, I stopped seeking their approval and started seeking their respect. I thought, maybe if I could save them something huge, something with a dollar sign so big even Victor couldn't ignore it, maybe then they'd see my value. It turns out, that was the most dangerous miscalculation of my life. About 8 years ago, the Hayes family hit a rough patch. Not rough by normal standards, but a serious hiccup in their Vegas portfolio. Brandon, who was running the development side, had ignored warnings about the local water table during a foundation pour for a massive new resort. Long story short, the structural integrity of the nearly finished resort, a $90 million asset, was compromised. The official estimate to fix the foundational shifts was catastrophic, something like $50 million. The banks were ready to pull the plug, and the shame would have crippled Victor's reputation. Brandon, of course, panicked. He threw his hands up, blaming the engineers, the contractors, anyone but himself. Victor was in a silent rage, pacing his office like a caged lion. I read the structural reports. I didn't care about the hotel business, but I understood the engineering challenge. It wasn't just fixing concrete. It was about understanding how the stresses were distributed, how the building was settling, and how to stabilize it without demolishing half the structure. It was a massive, complex restoration job just on a different scale than a car. I walked into Victor's office, which was smelling like stale panic and expensive cologne, and laid out a plan. Dad, I can stabilize the structure for a fraction of that cost, but I need total control of the project and the engineering team. Brandon stays out. Victor looked at me, his cold eyes calculating. He wasn't seeing his son. He was seeing a lifeline. His desperation trumped his disdain. He grunted. You get a week. Graham, 1 week to prove your hobby is worth something more than wasted garage space. I dove in. For 6 straight months. I wasn't restoring chrome. I was restoring concrete. I used specialized hydraulic jacking systems and calculated deep soil injection points. I was on site 18 hours a day, covered in dust and sweat, doing the actual engineering work Brandon couldn't stomach. I found the structural truth underneath the cosmetic failure. I didn't just stabilize the building. I saved his $90 million asset for less than $10 million. When the project was done, and the resort opened on time, Victor held a massive press conference. He stood on the podium, Brandon beside him, beaming. He praised the engineering team, but he never once mentioned my name. Not once. Brandon gave me a weak, forced smile later and muttered, "Good work, Graham. Shows what you can do when you focus on something real." I drove away from that gleaming resort that day with a $10 million victory, but I felt emptier than when I started. I didn't get a bonus. I didn't get thanks. I didn't get respect. I got the cold, hard realization that nothing I could ever do would change their perception of who I was. My skill was useful, but my identity was an embarrassment. That's when the engine of obsession really took over. I retreated deeper into my garage. My focus became almost compulsive. I started seeking out the impossible projects, the cars so far gone that others wouldn't touch them. I needed to prove my worth to the only person who mattered, myself. The Duesenberg project, the one Victor had dared me to complete, the one that triggered the email, was the ultimate expression of this obsession. Duesenbergs are gods among cars. This particular one was chassis number 2505, utterly unique, and it had been sitting disassembled in crates for 40 years. It wasn't just complex, it was an act of historical resurrection. I liquidated most of my personal savings, knowing the risk. I spent 18 months tracking down original components and machining perfect reproductions of parts that no longer existed. My hands were constantly sore. My sleep was minimal. But the internal monologue drove me. If I can bring this piece of automotive history back to life, maybe, just maybe, I can silence the voice that says I'm worthless. My relationship with my girlfriend, Sarah, suffered terribly during that time. She saw the obsession. She saw the sickness. "Graham, you haven't slept in 30 hours. She'd plead, standing in the garage doorway, the smell of paint thinner stinging her eyes. "You saved your father's business, and he didn't even send a card. Why are you killing yourself over this car for him?" I couldn't articulate the answer. I just shook my head, my eyes locked on the engine block. "It's not for him, Sarah. It's for me. I need to finish what I start. I need to prove I can do something that is fundamentally, structurally sound." I was fighting the structural damage Victor had done to my self-worth. The conflict wasn't just external. It was internal. Every time Brandon called, smugly announcing his latest acquisition, or every time Eleanor passively suggested I take an online accounting course, the pain was dulled only by the sound of my lathe shaping a perfect brass fitting. One particularly low point, about 6 months into the Duesenberg project, I had a catastrophic failure with a newly machined part. I lost 3 days of work. I sat on the cold concrete floor, covered in oil, and felt the weight of all those years of rejection crushing me. I pulled out my phone and looked at the number for the family office, the number I knew by heart. I almost called Victor, almost begged for a handshake, a word of affirmation, anything, but I didn't. I stood up, went to the shelf, and pulled down a new block of steel. I didn't need their validation anymore. I just needed the car. That Duesenberg was my last great sacrifice. The final piece of evidence I thought I needed to prove I was worthy of the name Hayes. I had no idea how ironic that would become. I was building a monument to a lie, an artifact of a life that wasn't even mine, and the completion of that sacrifice was about to trigger the ultimate downfall of the Hayes family. The Duesenberg was finished. 2 years of my life, hundreds of sleepless nights, and every dollar I could spare went into bringing that legendary machine back from the dead. It wasn't just metal and leather. It was a physical manifestation of my desperation to prove my worth to Victor. And the irony, the brutal, gut-punching irony, was that I completed it just 3 days after Mr. Finch's email told me I was cut off. I decided I was still going to take it to the party. Victor was celebrating his 60th birthday with an insane, over-the-top gala at the flagship Hayes Resort in Las Vegas. You know, the kind of place all shimmering gold, black granite, and air so thick with expensive perfume and ambition you could cut it with a knife. It was the perfect stage for the final act of my humiliation. I drove the Duesenberg myself. I had my beaten-up Ford F-150 towing the enclosed trailer, carrying a priceless piece of automotive history right past the valet line, which was a parade of Bentleys, Lambos, and custom Rolls-Royces. I parked my truck right next to a chrome-plated G-Wagon, and I didn't care what the valets thought. This was my statement. The party was already in full swing. 300 of the Western elite investors, rival hotel owners, politicians all kissing Victor's ring. He was standing on a raised platform, glowing under the spotlights, with my brother Brandon glued to his side, looking every bit the triumphant successor. Brandon's eyes met mine when I walked in, and his smirk was the most genuine expression I'd ever seen him make. He didn't have to say a word. His eyes screamed, "You got the email, hobby boy. You lost." I waited until Victor was about to give his big, self-congratulatory toast. I knew the moment would grab everyone's attention. I had the resort staff, the guys who actually respected me because I fixed their cars on the side, unveil the Duesenberg right outside the glass ballroom doors. When Victor raised his glass, I nodded. The door slid open, and the lights in the ballroom dimmed, leaving a single spotlight focused on the car. It took their breath away. I watched the faces of the most jaded people in the room drop. The Duesenberg wasn't just restored. It was flawless. It was a time capsule. The original color, the perfect chrome lines, the sheer mechanical artistry. It was an undeniable, objective work of genius. It was worth more than most of the people standing there. I walked toward Victor, feeling a strange mix of dread and hope. I hadn't dressed up. I wore a clean but simple jacket over dark jeans, and my hands, though clean, still had the faint scars and ingrained marks of a craftsman. Victor lowered his glass, his smile dissolving. He didn't look impressed. He looked threatened. "Graham," he said, his voice loud enough to carry, but clipped with pure venom. "What the hell is this happy birthday?" "Dad," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "It's chassis number 2505. I finished it. I restored it to original factory specs. It's yours." Silence hung in the air. This was the moment. He could have taken the win. He could have said, "My son, the engineer, the artist." But Victor couldn't stomach the idea of my independent achievement. He stepped off the platform, walked right past me, and went to the car. He didn't touch it. He just stared at the hood, his jaw tight. Then he spun back, his face an alarming shade of red, ignoring the phone cameras that were already coming up. "You think this is what I wanted?" he roared, pointing at the priceless car, a relic. "You brought an antique to my $6 million event. This proves nothing. You spent 2 years trying to fix something old. When you should have been investing in the future, you're wasting your potential, wasting your name, wasting the genetics I gave you, Brandon." beside him, was smiling a thin, vicious smile of pure victory. I tried one last time. Dad, it's about engineering. It's about value. He cut me off. He stepped right up to me, his breath smelling of aged scotch and contempt. It's about money. Graham, you don't understand real money. You don't understand the game. You think you're better than us because you get your hands dirty. You're a liability. You always have been. And if you thought this little hobby project would change my mind about your lack of commitment, or change the fact that my parents took me out of their $95 million, well, you were dead wrong. He grabbed the glass of scotch out of a passing waiter's hand and, instead of drinking it, he threw the entire contents into my face. The cold liquid stung my eyes, running down my jacket, dripping off my chin. It was a cold, absolute baptism in contempt. Get out of my hotel. Graham, you get nothing. Go play in your dirt. I wiped the scotch from my eyes. The entire room was staring, phones recording. I saw a photographer from Vegas Monthly practically salivating. But the person I focused on was Brandon. He was enjoying this too much. The pure, unadulterated joy on his face was a confirmation this was premeditated. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply turned and walked out, leaving the Duesenberg where it stood, a brilliant, perfect monument to a father's monstrous cruelty. I drove my Ford F-150 back to the garage, my face still stinging from the scotch, knowing that my father's words were already viral. The entire world had just witnessed the final, most brutal rejection of my life. I was done being Graham Hayes. I just had to figure out who I was going to be instead. I drove back to my shop that night in a state of absolute, detached calm. The scotch was drying on my shirt, sticking the fabric to my skin, and the rage had evaporated, replaced by this hollow, freezing quiet. I wasn't just disinherited. I was publicly disgraced, a viral laughingstock. I knew the videos were already racking up millions of views. Hotel heiress slaps mechanic son with scotch. It was the ultimate tabloid spectacle. The Duesenberg, that beautiful, perfectly restored lie, was still sitting under the Vegas spotlights. I didn't care. I got back to the warehouse around 3 a.m. The familiar smell of oil and metal was the only thing that felt honest in my life. I didn't sleep. Instead, I pulled out my yellow pad and started doing what I do best, engineering a solution. I began drawing up liquidation plans. Sell the shop, sell the truck, bankroll a fresh start somewhere the name Graham Bell Hayes meant absolutely nothing. Maybe Scotland, maybe just a dusty garage in rural Oklahoma. I was planning my escape, focused purely on survival, when the world decided to hit me with a multi-twist plot I never could have written. It happened around 9:30 a.m. I was bent over my desk, reviewing inventory, when I heard the sound of tires that didn't belong here. It was the whisper of expensive European rubber on cracked asphalt, and it stopped right outside my roll-up door. I went to the service entrance and opened the door just enough to look out. Standing there was a sleek, black Rolls-Royce Ghost, and flanking it were three people who looked like they'd been peeled straight out of a London corporate law firm. The man in the center, tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my transmission hoist, looked at me with an expression I couldn't place. It was sympathy mixed with intense focus. He spoke with an accent that was all tailored precision and British formality. "Mr. Graham Bell," he asked, his voice low and cultured. "Who's asking?" I replied, my hand gripping the door handle. I assumed they were legal threats from Victor, maybe an injunction against me even thinking about the Duesenberg. "My name is Mr. Harrison White. I am senior counsel to Sir Alistair Sterling." He paused, letting the name hang in the dry desert air. "We need to speak with you urgently. It concerns your true lineage." I scoffed. My lineage, my true lineage is right across the state, yelling at people in Vegas. "Look, if this is about the will, you're late. I got the email." Harrison White gave a small, sad shake of his head. "It is not about the will, Mr. Bell. It is about a life that was taken from you 30 years ago. Sir Alistair Sterling has been searching for his kidnapped son since you were 6 months old. The world tilted. Kidnapped. It was so far outside the realm of possibility, so insane, that for a second, I thought the Scotch fumes were finally getting to me. I thought, this is a prank. Brandon set this up. You're telling me, I managed, my voice rough, that Victor Hayes, my father, kidnapped me. We need you to sit down. The evidence is substantial. Mr. Bell, may we come in? I let them in, numbly stepping aside as they filed into my chaotic space. The contrast was absurd, these people in their $5,000 suits, surrounded by rusty engines, welding torches, and the smell of industrial degreaser. Harrison White placed a slim, leather briefcase on my workbench, the same workbench where I'd fabricated the final pieces for the Duesenberg. He opened it and pulled out a manila folder, sliding a faded photograph toward me. The photo showed a beautiful woman with warm, intelligent eyes and a tall man who had the same precise, engineering-focused look I had. They were holding a tiny baby. But it was the detail that hit me, the piece of evidence that bypassed my logical mind and slammed straight into my soul. Around the baby's neck, dangling from a small chain, was a delicate, ornate silver pocket watch. My breath hitched. My hand went instantly to my own neck. Hanging there, under my shirt, was the antique pocket watch I always carried, the one Victor had given me for my 18th birthday, telling me it was a Rhodes family heirloom from my great-grandfather. It was identical, down to the faint etching on the casing. That is you, Liam Sterling, 6 months old, 2 weeks before you were abducted from a park in London, Harrison White stated, his voice now gentle but certain. The watch was a christening gift from your mother, Lady Alara Sterling. We have the forensic analysis and DNA confirmation from a genealogical match Victor Hayes was foolish enough to participate in 5 years ago. The realization wasn't a slow burn. It was an explosion. The shame I felt over the past 30 years, the sense of not belonging, the deep-seated friction with Victor, it wasn't some cosmic personality clash. It was a lie. Every birthday, every Christmas, every belittling word about my hobby was built on a monumental criminal act. My legs didn't just feel weak, they gave out. I hit the cold concrete floor of my garage, surrounded by the physical evidence of my real nature, the tools, the engines, the honest metal. My name isn't Graham Bell, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. It is not, the lawyer confirmed softly. It is Liam Sterling. And the reason we are here, Mr. Sterling, is that you are the sole heir to the Sterling Group, an international conglomerate worth approximately $3.5 billion. The sting of Victor's scotch on my cheek, the memory of the $95 million loss, it all vanished. It was irrelevant. I hadn't lost my inheritance. I had lost my life, and I had just found a world I never knew existed. You know, hitting the floor of my own garage after hearing I was kidnapped, finding out my name wasn't Graham Bell, and learning I was sitting on a $3.5 billion inheritance. That wasn't the hard part. The hard part was the absolute emptiness that came next. Everything I thought was stable was a lie. My anger at Victor for cutting me out of the $95 million, well, that was just background noise now. My true focus shifted entirely. I needed justice, and I needed to understand the mechanics of the crime they had committed. I didn't leave the shop for 2 days. Harrison White, the British lawyer, and his team handled everything. They confirmed the DNA with a separate, unassailable test. They laid out the paper trail that Victor, in his arrogance, had maintained for 30 years, forged adoption records, backdated payments, even a small, annual bribe to a defunct agency in Mexico. Victor was meticulous in his business, and he was meticulous in his crime. The lawyers brought me a suit, not a tailored Italian one like Brandon wore, but a solid, well-cut American suit because, as Harrison White put it, Mr. Sterling, you need to be prepared for the confrontation, and the confrontation needs to be decisive. The confrontation wasn't just a heated meeting. It was a calculated surgical strike. We hit them when they were least prepared and most exposed. Victor Hayes, the man who had preached integrity while kidnapping a child, was scheduled to give a major televised address at the Arizona Chamber of Commerce luncheon. This was his sanctuary, his stage. It was a room packed with every investor, politician, and rival who valued his reputation above all else. The same audience, essentially, that had watched him throw scotch in my face. I didn't go. I sat in a conference room with Harrison White and his team, watching the live feed. Victor was at the podium, beaming, just finishing a sentence about the foundation of trust being the real currency in business. The hypocrisy was suffocating. Then, the doors burst open. It wasn't me, the mechanic's son, bursting in for a scene. It was the FBI. 2 agents in dark suits walked straight up to the podium. The camera zoomed in on Victor's face. And honestly, I wish I could forget that sight. The shock was absolute. His eyes went wide, not with fear, but with unbelievable, pure indignation, the rage of a powerful man realizing his absolute control was gone. They didn't even let him finish his sentence. They placed him in handcuffs right there, on the stage, in front of the local news cameras and every person who had ever kissed his ring. The sound was cut off on the live feed, but I could read his lips. This is a mistake, my lawyers, my connections. That was justice, not the $3.5 billion. The real justice was watching the man who had always measured my worth in dollars lose his entire reputation, his freedom, and his supposed legacy in one humiliating, viral moment. Eleanor, my mother, my kidnapper, was arrested simultaneously at a spa near her home. She broke almost immediately, confessing to the entire miserable plot. How she desperately sought a child after multiple failed pregnancies. How Victor, in his arrogant need to maintain the facade of the perfect family, facilitated the crime. She wasn't cold. She was utterly broken, having lived 30 years in fear, trying to love the son she knew she had stolen. That, to me, was a harsher prison sentence than any judge could hand down. Brandon, the golden child, called me hours later. He wasn't crying, but he was whining. Graham, you have to fix this. The feds are freezing all the assets, my apartment, my accounts, they're all tied up in the business. You need to tell them it was a misunderstanding. He wasn't sorry for the kidnapping. He wasn't sorry for the cruelty. He was sorry for the lost liquidity. I was calm. I was Liam Sterling, not Graham Bell. Brandon, I said, my voice steady. I was never Graham Bell. You're upset about the money, but everything the Hayes family built was contaminated by the crime they committed against me. I'm not fixing this. This is your foundation, and it's rotting. I hung up before he could respond. That call was the final act of separation. I set the boundary. I am not your brother. I am not your family. The next few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork, therapy, and setting up my new life. I refused to go back to the Hayes estate. I refused visitation. I spent the time in my garage, surrounded by my tools, the only honest objects I owned. I had the Duesenberg towed back. It was a painful sight. The car I built as a plea for acceptance now stood as the definitive proof of my rejection. But I didn't sell it. Not yet. I just cleaned the scotch off the hood and let it sit there, waiting for the final truth to be revealed, the truth of who Liam Sterling was meant to be. The first step in recovery wasn't the multi-billion-dollar bank account. It was the realization that I was finally free from the golden cage. Watching Victor and Eleanor, the people I called my parents for 30 years, have their world dissolve in a blaze of public disgrace that was the necessary ending. But it wasn't the real ending. Justice is cold, but healing is warm, and it required me to finally embrace the life that had been stolen. I had to meet the man who never stopped looking for me. The first meeting with Sir Alistair Sterling wasn't in a lavish boardroom or a formal setting. Harrison White arranged it at a private club near my new place in London. A quiet, almost academic-looking place far removed from the neon chaos of Vegas. When I saw him, it was like looking at myself 30 years in the future. If that future had been well-fed and relentlessly focused, he had the same intensity in his eyes, the same precise way of holding himself. He stood up, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. There were no immediate hugs, no theatrical tears, just two men staring at the most massive, painful question mark in their lives. Then, he simply nodded toward my neck. "You still wear the watch. Your mother wore the matching one every single day until the end." That was it. That simple, quiet acknowledgement of the pocket watch, the single, physical piece of my lost identity, broke the dam. We talked for hours. He told me about Lady Alara, my biological mother, who had been an aerospace engineer. She had designed the early navigation systems for the Sterling Group. He told me about her grief, her resilience, and how she never gave up the hope that Liam Sterling was out there, somewhere. I told him about my shop. I told him about the cars, the oil, the perfection of a restored engine. And this is where the real connection happened, the thing that validated every choice I'd ever made. "Liam," he said, leaning forward, "your work, it is everything my work has always been. You take something broken, you strip away the rust and the neglect, and you return it to its true, powerful form. You don't just fix sheet metal, you restore value. You see the flawless engineering underneath the cosmetic failure. That is the Sterling way." He didn't offer me a check or an immediate CEO title. He offered me a challenge that appealed directly to the deepest part of my soul. "I have a subsidiary, Liam. It's a tech firm we acquired years ago, and it's failing. It's structurally sound. The tech is genius, but the management team, the culture, the internal processes, they've allowed rust and neglect to settle in. It's an underdog. I need you to do what you do best. Restore it. Use your eye for value and potential. Bring the engineering soul back." That was the turning point. I didn't want the $3.5 billion that was just a number. But I wanted the respect of this man, my true father, who saw my passion not as a hobby but as a philosophy. I accepted the challenge. I still run my restoration business now, a global operation focused on finding and restoring the absolute rarest, most challenging underdogs in automotive history. But I spend half my time applying the restoration mindset to the corporate world. It wasn't easy. I fired people who were running on rust, and I invested heavily in the original engineering, the brilliant, passionate employees who were being ignored. It took 18 brutal months, but I stabilized the company, purged the contaminants, and eventually led a massive turnaround. The most satisfying part, the Duesenberg. I had it shipped to London. I didn't sell it. Instead, I had it prominently displayed in the lobby of the tech firm I had just saved. It stands there not as a monument to Victor's cruelty, but as a symbol of my freedom and the absolute proof that value is inherent, not assigned. The $95 million loss. It's a punchline now. Victor and Eleanor are facing serious prison time. Brandon is struggling, forced to work in lower management outside the family assets. He got his wish, he got the Hayes name, and everything that came with it, including the toxic inheritance of their shame. I lost a name, but I gained a legacy. I lost a fortune built on a lie, but I gained a life built on truth and purpose. I am Liam Sterling, and I'm finally home. This is my life now. It's a powerful lesson. They can try to strip your name. They can try to take your money, but they can never take your true nature or the value of your honest work. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever been cut down by the people closest to you, but found the strength to build something stronger out of the wreckage, then I need you to do 3 things right now. First, hit that like button and share this video. Every single share helps someone else realize they're not alone in their fight. Second, drop a comment right now, telling me about a time your hobby or passion saved you from a toxic situation. I read every single comment, and your stories are the fuel for this channel. And finally, if you want to see more stories of absolute betrayal turning into total, unforgivable triumph, if you want to learn how to apply that restoration mindset to your own life and find your true value, then you absolutely must subscribe to this channel. We're building a community here for the underdogs, the forgotten, and the ones who refuse to stay broken. Join the fight. Subscribe right now.